Cue the music.
All right, welcome to Pineapple Podcast. I'm Tyler. This is Matt.
Hello.
In the back, we have Dave and Josh. Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
And we have a special guest today here, Anna Mullens.
Hi.
Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
I am so thrilled to be here.
It's awesome having you.
We should have just let it be like this really awkward pause.
I was going to
Wait
say,
a minute. Yeah.
Let's get that again.
How thrilled.
I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Am I?
Yeah. So we got to dive in deep right away because I think
Do it.
one of the things that I would love to do is we all love 90s music. I know that you love 90s music.
I do.
So I thought we'd start by getting to know you a little bit. I would love to know some of your favorite artists or acts of the 90s.
Oh, the first thing that comes to mind, I just have to say it, is the Spice Girls.
Really?
Yeah, I was a big Spice Girls fan, and I was one of those Spice Girls fans who knew which Spice Girl she was and like really fit into that caricature.
Who was that?
Oh, Posh Spice.
Posh Spice.
For me, it was Posh Spice back then. So we had the costumes. We did it right up. But my parents are from England, and so I have a connection. And when I first heard the Spice Girls was actually on a trip to England with my family. So I had a
very
special
cool.
place in my heart for them as well. But yeah, Spice Girls for sure. And then Gwen Stefani.
Oh, yeah.
In her
No
No Doubt
Doubt.
days.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Not in her individual days, but in the No Doubt days.
Which album? Tragic Kingdom?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. And then Green Day.
Oh, yeah.
God, I could just go on. This could just be a podcast about 90s music that Anna
No,
listens-
what got me into it
listens
was
to.
because I was listening to your podcasts, which I love, by the way. So thank you. It's honestly super exciting to be able to chat
Thank
with you.
you.
And listening to them, I was like, oh, I always kind of remember, when you're listening to podcasts and you're like, oh, if I get a chance to ever ask them, because we all love 90s music. And to me, I was always a closet hip hop lover. Loved
Oh, me
hip hop.
too.
Radiohead was my go-to. Like absolutely my go-to. And then also discovering anything that it was hipster before hipster.
Yeah.
And
Like
but-
Jurassic 5.
oh man, I was into like just the weirdest things, and then people at school would always be like, what are you listening to? And it'd be something that was so obscure, and I was always so proud that like we'd found something that was obscure in this. But yeah, no, I love 90s music. And
So do I.
Back like taping it, right? You'd have to wait for your song to come on. Like, what is it? Presidents of the United States, Peaches. I remember
Oh
waiting
my
for that one to
goodness,
come
yeah.
on.
Totally. And then you have to stop and record.
yeah,
And if you always miss like that first second at the beginning and that first second at the end.
yeah.
But still a huge accomplishment.
I got in like a fight, not like a physical, but like argument with my buddy in grade 7 because he taped Informer, Snow,
Yes.
and he wouldn't share it with me. He's like, no, man, I got this. I stayed up and taped it. I'm like, come on, man, share the wealth. He wouldn't do it.
But do you remember? It's interesting. I remember as a form, like, because I met my wife. She was 15. I was 17. Fell in love instantly, and we became best friends. And like it was just absolutely. And I remember one of the ways that I loved being able to, like, my love language was I remember putting together like mixtapes, and I absolutely
Naturally.
loved
Classic.
going through and like actually trying to tell it again, because the storyteller in me would always want to tell a story with the songs and finding the right song and then matching it with like, oh, I just had like a really fast one. It's got to, go to the next one.
Yes.
And like, man, I love that. And now it's like, share, check the song out. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Share. It just doesn't have that same feeling. I haven't found a way to feel, maybe we need to create an app about that or something. But
Right, yeah.
Mixtape.
I tagged you on this
Yes.
song.
I tagged you on
It
the
makes
song,
me
yeah.
think of you.
Like romance playlists or something.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but there was something more to it because you physically handed them, and then I would write on it, and I would create artwork, and I would draw the artwork, and like there was so much more of an investment into the act
Yeah.
that almost the music and putting it together was secondary to what it meant to me. And then
100%.
we'd drive and we'd listen to it, and it's funny because even the other day somebody was going to give me a CD, and I was like, I don't even own a CD
Yeah, I can't
player,
play that.
or I don't even have a DVD player at home. And then I realized I have one in the vehicle, so that.
Oh, there you go.
But other than that, it took me a little bit to figure out where I would even play one. But I do miss those days.
I do. I have a lot of nostalgia. That's the right word.
Yeah.
For just those, carefree days. And I think I put myself in that category in the 90s and like early 2000s, but that was like pre-marriage, pre-children. That was the time you could dress up like Posh Spice.
That's
You don't do it
awesome.
anymore?
On occasion, you'll have to check with my husband.
Yeah.
So have you shared the Spice Girls with your kids?
Oh, yeah. But there's a new song, and I'm going to get this all butchered up now because I'm not cool anymore. But there is a new song that has replicated Wannabe.
No.
It's like, it's the revised version for the younger generation.
No.
So my
What?
kids are listening to it and they think it's a brand new song.
Oh, no.
No way.
Pretty sure it's a brand new song. And so they're like, listen to this new song, Wannabe. I'm like, oh, children.
Well, Inform was the same
That's
thing.
funny.
My kids listen to it, like, because that's, you have we're just talking about like music and nostalgia and the things that you love. And it's funny, since my daughter has been born, I created a playlist for her, and anything that she loves, she's like, oh, I love that. You just add it to her playlist. So it's
Yeah, I
really
love
neat
that.
to have stuff on it that's when she was like 1, that she was really into it, 1 and 2, and it's all still there on the playlist. And part of it is I've wanted to have the excitement. I grew up in a very musical family, so it's always so exciting to see what they like without my hand. So without me guiding and dictating, because a lot of times, like even for myself, and I've shared it I think with the guys before, but when I was growing up, I grew up with a very musical family. So if I would listen to something that I thought was cool, because I was trying to always find these obscure things. I remember Nirvana was the biggest argument I got in with my dad, because he was classically trained, and like, so to him he's like, he sings like shit, and this is like, he was very, and he was right in that sense. But so was Bob Dylan, and I love Bob Dylan. And it kind of just, it put a bit of a wall. I just wouldn't talk to him then about it. So I would kind of closet, secret, hide my music, which was a massive part of my life.
Right.
So I didn't want to do that with my girls. I wanted them to have their own music and to be a part of it. So for the last 8 years, they've been the ones discovering all the music. And it's been the coolest thing, because there's so much music that I'm just absolutely fascinated into right now that I would have never chosen,
Yes.
just because of either the artist. It comes with a like Bieber. I freaking love Bieber. I would have never known that I love Bieber until I'm singing Holy and crying as I'm
Right.
holding my girls, like singing it to them and then playing it on the guitar. And then speaking of like Informer, so there's a song like Snow that it just came out like I think last year, and I'm like, that's Informer, but it wasn't. It was somebody else taking that same thing, and the girls are like, this is so great. I'm like, yeah, I grew up with that. Like, I grew up with this stuff.
That's
No, Dad, it's a
hilarious.
new
Yeah.
song.
Right. Here we are trying to be cool.
Yeah.
Like we are.
Oh, I'm not trying at all.
Yeah, been there.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Spiced up my life already.
Oh yes, several times over.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, it's funny because I even grew up like, it's hard not to listen to them because they're everywhere back in the day.
Oh yeah.
So like those songs are imprinted in my brain too.
Yeah, and like most of them aren't that good. Like the songs are not great. It was really about the characters, and it was
Yeah.
really about, as you say, the story
Yeah.
of who this gang was,
Totally.
of who this little squad was that was running around kind of telling stories about how to be.
And they're so unique. They all
Yeah.
had their thing, right? So
Well,
like,
I think it was also cool too, because it was definitely groundbreaking for like girl power. Like it was like really, like I remember that because my sisters were super into them, and like all my friends that were girls were really into them. And I remember getting into it too, because you couldn't not get into the
Yeah.
pop sound of it. Like
totally.
yeah, but it was really neat to see at the time when there was a lot of male-driven pop acts.
Oh yeah.
That it was like, holy, these girls just came in and just destroyed them. And it was just awesome, because it was like the game changed. And it was such a cool thing to just see that it went like worldwide.
Worldwide.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
actually one of my very first feminist learnings, potentially, as a teenager. I'm sure it wasn't my first because my mother was a strong feminist, but actually came from the Spice Girls, which I may be slightly ashamed to admit at this point. But it was from an interview that they were doing, and it was Baby Spice. I remember very clearly. And I don't even recall what the interviewer's question was, but her response was, to your point about girl power, that women can wear the Wonder Bras and they can wear the makeup and they can wear the high heels, but they need to have something to say about it. So it was, now I could dissect that and unravel it and unwind it and find a lot of probably problems with some of that thinking. But I honestly remember at the time going, you know what, you're right. We don't have to choose between looking a certain way or dressing a certain way and actually speaking up for something that we believe in. So
That's
there you
awesome.
go.
That's
How old
awesome.
are you, roughly, about that time?
I am. How old
No,
was
how
I
old
then?
were you? Yeah. No, I didn't ask you now. How old are you? That's a
let's
very
do the
abrupt
math.
change. Sorry about that.
That's a great question, but I probably was 15,
Yeah.
maybe.
That's so cool, just because it's such an impressionable age.
Oh,
Like
God,
there's
yeah.
so much going on. So it's amazing to get that, because that's a great thing to hear at that age as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally.
Because I know growing up with sisters and friends that were girls, and just seeing, being in the locker room with the guys and hearing them talk and being like, this is just bullshit, man. Because I'm hanging out with the girls and this is not happening. So this is not weighing itself out. And then seeing the struggles like of what they were going through and thinking through, like I remember I feel very blessed that I did grow up with sisters that were very open as well about stuff. Actually, I was just joking about my 3-year-old. We can't keep clothes on her. She just
That's so funny.
Does not want clothing right now. And
I
it's something,
have one of those children myself.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's not something that I care about, to be honest. It's more or less we live on a farm and she just likes to be naked everywhere. And who knows what's on the ground and this, Anyway, so she's naked all the time. Yeah. But then growing up with sisters where they were hilariously open about absolutely everything that was going on in their life. And at the time, I remember being like, but now I'm extremely grateful for it.
I bet.
Because there's nothing that in my life was taboo. We talked about absolutely everything. So it's something that I think that when, especially at the younger ages, when things are taboo and we stop talking about it, there are going to be issues.
Yeah.
So the earlier we can start talking about things, I've noticed even my daughter being so attentive to stuff and asking me. And funny enough, tonight, just as I was leaving to come here, I tuck her in every night. I lay with her, I hug her, and she's like, you're rushing, Dad. I'm like, well, I don't want to be late. And I said, I'm sorry that I'm rushing tonight and everything. And she told me, she goes, Dad, how are babies made, Dad?
She just
and
knows.
I knew. I was like, oh, you're really procrastinating tonight, right? I'm like, we'll talk about it in the morning, sweetheart.
That's so funny.
It was so cute because we talked about it a million times, but she knew. But I was like, at 8 years old, there's this thought pattern going through her head of like,
I got to stall Dad for just a couple more minutes.
Yeah, and this is a good one. This is a good question to...
This one always takes a while to explain.
No, it doesn't.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was lucky with older sisters too, because like it was nice to have them, teach me to be like nice to my younger brother and caring. And you see what they go through. Especially for me, it was more of like you'd see jerk guys like treat them like crap, and I'm like, okay,
right.
don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, and then you got to get to learn through them. And yeah, it was super nice.
I said I said fuck for the first time as a little kid defending my older sister.
That's funny.
Somebody said something about her, and I was like, fuck you, because I'd heard an older kid say it, and I got in a lot of trouble at home.
I think I did something similar, but I was like, Dad, Jen said fuck.
Yeah.
And then he got smacked me because I said fuck.
Yeah. No, I didn't. Oh, man. One of your podcasts, you mentioned soccer, that you played soccer growing up.
Yeah.
Anything else you played as a kid?
I played volleyball and basketball. I was like the classic school sport kid. I did gymnastics early on, and then I progressed immediately into soccer because my dad, as I mentioned, they're British, and my dad grew up actually in quite an extreme level of poverty in England. And one of his only escapes from a lot of that kind of painful childhood experience was to play soccer.
Oh, cool.
Out in the street. And so he found his sense of self, his sense of belonging, his community, his skills, his talents, everything through soccer. So we were raised literally with soccer. And I think I was about 6 or 7. I was very young when my dad actually started coaching. And he coached my team and brought up kind of my squad of girls, my Spice Girl gang, Spice Girl soccer gang, all the way from probably age 6 all the way to when we left for university. So he was my soccer coach. So I played fairly competitively. And I think at one point before I left high school, there was 7 days a week that had soccer in it.
Yeah.
So whether I was coaching or refereeing or playing on school teams and local league teams and all-star teams and traveling on the weekends and stuff, it really was like my childhood was basically soccer.
So was he harder on you because you were the coach's daughter stereotype there? Or?
No, that's interesting. I don't recall ever having that experience. Maybe he processed that in his mind, but he certainly never reflected that outwardly
to me. That's awesome.
Yeah. It was just a really nice upbringing, frankly. So if I think about my childhood and all of those years, it was basically soccer and the teams and the traveling and the camaraderie, the sisterhood.
That's awesome.
And the Spice Girls.
And the Spice Girls.
And the Spice Girls.
Sisterhood and Spice Girls.
And Gwen Stefani. Things like that.
Yeah. I was a big No Doubt fan. I listened to it. It's funny with certain albums, like you memorize like the track order too, so like you hear the next song right away. And it reminds you of like a time of your life. You know, like you can kind of, like I can actually hear some of the songs from Tragic Kingdom and like just picture being like sitting in my mom's like playroom back when I was a kid playing Mario 64.
Oh,
like,
totally.
It's just like puts you right back.
I didn't think about that now that you mentioned it, is that I remember hearing a song, even say come on like a mixtape or something, or even if you hear it on the radio, and you had this feeling come up inside of you, like you knew the next song coming on the album, but it didn't come.
Yeah.
Wonder if,
isn't that weird?
I wonder if kids still...
If they still get that. Yeah, what about kids these days? You think they get that?
We should ask one or two.
Welcome to the next segment on Pineapple Podcast.
Yeah.
What do kids these days think?
Yeah.
This is the elderly portion.
What's
Yo,
an
kidding,
album?
What's an album?
It's hilarious. Well, one of the things as listening to your podcast, you've had some amazing people on the podcast.
It's
and
been fun, really fun.
It's awesome. And it's super inspiring
you.
for us because we're just getting started. And so we look up to so many podcasts. And I was really excited to have you on because I think you do a phenomenal job.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And it got me thinking, if there's one guest that would be like the dream guest for you to have on that you haven't had on, who would that be?
Oh, well, I mean, do we all just say Oprah? Is that a thing? Do we just
Oh,
say?
I'd be into
Wouldn't that
that.
be great? I mean, I'd love
You
to
get a
interview-
podcast.
You,
You get a podcast.
everybody. I would love to interview Oprah, but I mean, that's the dream, isn't it, for the world?
That's cool.
I mean, at some point, I'm certified with Deepak Chopra. I would love to talk to Deepak or even Malika Chopra, his daughter, who were like really significant mentors for me early on in my career. Who else? I'm trying to think. Do you know what I love who I love to talk to is just really regular people. And I'm using like air quotes here, like regular people, because I am also a regular person and we are all, even the Deepaks and the Oprahs of the world, are regular people. But I love talking to people who haven't had the opportunity to share their story yet.
Yeah.
Because I think, and most of my work, if you've listened to the podcast, you'll know, is rooted in the power of storytelling and what it really can do to transform people's lives when they finally are able to be heard and when they can finally process who they are and why they are. So I really have I just love talking to people who are still kind of figuring that out. It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And that's probably like one of the more enjoyable things too of listening to your podcast is that you feel that. And you're a great interviewer. Like
Thank
that's
you.
that's a tough skill, right? It's like,
Huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
we're still figuring it out.
I'll give you some tips.
Okay, please.
Don't do it on camera.
So,
Please.
yeah. And now
Please.
tips
Yeah.
at Pineapple Podcast.
Oh, hilarious. I have no tips prepared, but I will tell you that every interview is different, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know this as hosts, like, you never really know where the guest wants to go.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I say to my guests at the front end of most of our recordings is, I always have another question up my sleeve. Like, you're not going to put me off process at all if something feels off limits to you. You just keep talking where you're comfortable. And one of my gifts is that I can really read energy. And so if I see somebody's energy sort of changing, I will just follow that energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really hard to kind of define
Yeah,
what
that's
that
awesome.
is, but it's just about really caring about people and often caring about their story.
I think it's such a cool thing too, because I think a lot of people, I mean, we all just want to know that we're being heard.
Yeah.
Right. So
That's
so
it.
to have an opportunity for, I mean, as we were talking, hopping on the podcast today, as I was saying that, like, my wife and I were always fascinated with people's stories and sitting
Yeah.
and just watching people walk down the street and thinking like, man, they've got a story. And you could just see it on their face, the way they walk, the way they carry
Yeah.
themselves, the way that they carry, their basket of, good food that they just got. And we'd always be like, I wonder what their story is, like where
Yeah.
they're going, what their day looks like. And I was always fascinated. Both of us have always been fascinated about
Yeah.
that. And it's something that I do appreciate. Like, that's what I really do appreciate about technology and the long form conversations
Yeah.
is, for us, we actually don't really do interviews. It's more just a conversation we're having with people that are, I say, brave enough to come on and just to open up and to
Or
share.
strong enough.
Or
Or
strong.
enough. But it's,
Brave or strong.
yeah, but it's one of those things that, like, opening up is very nerve-wracking and scary for a lot of people. And the
Yeah.
thing is that having people on to come and share their story and for others to go, oh my goodness, that's me in parts. And then there's times where I listen to all sorts of podcasts and go, that's me. And it's so encouraging to be like, I'm not alone in the way that I thought about that.
Yeah.
Or like even in the happiest parts of my life, go, oh, somebody else experienced that too. That's so cool. Like,
Yep.
it's just neat to know that we're connected.
100%.
it's a
And
very
it's
cool
all about,
thing.
I actually recorded a podcast yesterday, so I'm giving a little like teaser here of some of the information we talked about, but it's so relevant to this topic. And we were talking about the responsibility and when stigma is built around certain topics or certain stories, things that we are too taboo, because anytime there's a taboo, there's a stigma somewhere, right? That we have to dissect and figure out. And the go-to is that the person who's holding that story, who feels the shame and who feels that sense of stigma, is scared to say it because it's attached to their understanding or what they're making that mean, which ultimately is, if I share this, I will therefore not be loved. I will not receive love. I will not receive acceptance. I will not receive acknowledgement or approval, all those core human needs. So we're processing that at a subconscious level. And so if we share, we have been taught at some point in our life that sharing equals a lack of love, acceptance, approval, acknowledgement.
Yeah.
So it really is the responsibility, not of the storyteller, but of the collective audience, of the people, just us in general, the listeners, hosts, people walking down the street, family members, friends, to be more empathetic. I think we talked about this before we started recording.
Yeah.
But to really receive and hear and validate people's stories, because it's not the story that carries stigma, it's the response. It's that feedback that we're getting, right? And then we stop sharing, and that's really tragic, because then we don't have those Me Too moments.
Yeah, it's tough because there's a lot of also, I mean, as I mentioned earlier to you that, I've had the pleasure of working for my wife, and she's my best friend, and to be honest, the biggest inspiration in my life.
You're
And
so fortunate.
she's a phenomenal listener. And I think that's also something that goes into what you're saying as well. She's taught me so much about listening. And I think a lot of times, I know for myself, like, you know how you're mentioning, like, you'll read someone's body language. That's my job. I've done that since I was a kid. Like, and it's not just listening to what somebody's saying. It's what their eyes are saying. It's what their body's saying. It's what their breathing is saying. It's what their hands are doing. It's what their sweat is doing on their forehead.
Are you watching me right now?
Yeah, but this is
Fiddling
all,
with my
it's all
fingers.
things my wife's taught me. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because it's even the silence, the things that you're not saying. And so I've noticed that even for myself, like, I'm realizing even in my life, I'm having to tell my girls sometimes, like, oh, sorry, because I notice I'll go silent if they're not listening. Or if I notice someone's not listening, it's like, oh, you're not actually paying attention, so I'll just go silent. And that's another form of, like, just like, I was realizing I have to work on that with my girls, is it's like, no, I don't want, because a lot of times they'll be like, you okay, Dad? I'm like, yeah, even though I'm not saying anything. And you think, oh, like, I was saying something, but they weren't listening, so then I just go silent. And I'm realizing how listening is a huge part of that communication, about that huge aspect of what you're talking about, is that when someone does be strong, brave, whatever word we want to use, when they have that courage, and that's the thing too, that to me, bravery means going with your gut. It's not just strength, of physical strength, or other things. And I'd like to talk about that too, because I think it'd be so fun. But I also, like, really do love sitting and listening to people and them knowing you've got my attention. And I think that's what we're a lot of times we just, like, I can't, sometimes it's intimidating too, because I know with my wife, I'm like, oh wow, you're really listening to every piece of, like, my soul.
Right.
And it's the coolest thing. But for people to know that they have an opportunity to sit down on your podcast, and it's a non-threatening way to have a conversation with someone where they can share their story, and they're literally, what if you're the only person that's legit listened to them in their entire life, and they leave and their soul is just charged and just fed? It's like, that's incredible to me.
Yeah, it's a really powerful act, I think. Like, I mean, you say listening or active listening, but really just, I kind of hate this term. I hate using it, but I'm going to use it right now. It's like holding space. Right? Because what I really want to always say is, like, can we just hold the people? Can we just, like, yes, we can do space, and I understand what the meaning of that is and why it's important in active listening and creating safe spaces and boundaries and things. But sometimes I just want to reach out and just hold people and say, like, I hear you, and you are not alone.
Yeah.
Right? This is, like, the human experience for all of us. And just because it manifests in different ways in each of our lives because of our experiences and our influences growing up, does not mean that we are not at the core having the exact same human experience. In fact, I did a talk a couple of years, I can't remember, 5 years ago probably now. And it was to a very corporate audience. So you have to break through corporate audience. It's not as easy as a spiritual group or a group of women doing a women's event like Unapologetic is. And I had them write down a list of all of the feelings that they'd had in, like, the last month. All the things that they'd experienced, anger, frustration, fear, et cetera, and just make a list. Anything that you can remember. Can you recall a period of happiness or joy or fear or pain? What came up for you? Then I said, now stand up if you believe there are any words on that list that somebody else in this room has not experienced. And obviously we get laughter out of the room, right? It's this momentary, like, aha moment. They go, well, of course. And even all of those things, you're not going to write something down that I've not heard of. There's not a thing. That's not a thing. You're not going to be like, well, there's this surprise one that you've never felt before. Surprise, it's this, and it's some alien word that we have to now try and understand. There is not a human experience for when you get into the core feelings and emotions that you haven't felt, that I haven't felt.
Yeah.
Right? You get a feeling, you get a feeling, you get a feeling. The Oprah card deck here. We all have it. So when we have that recognition, we're like, oh, okay. So it's really only our stories that differentiate us, that make us unique. That's the positive term.
Yeah.
And then underneath that, we're just, all these stories are rooted in core emotions and core feelings
Shared
and core human
experiences
experience.
and,
Shared
yeah.
experiences. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that not only with the podcast, you kind of have people on and help them have their stories be heard, but you also, one of your other hats that you wear is you help teach public speaking, right? Or you help them with public speaking and help share their story with, a big group and one of the more challenging places to feel vulnerable, right?
It is. Well, they do say public speaking, I think, or stage speaking is like one of the top fears, is being able to actually go on a stage and stand in front of a crowd and share any story, let alone your actual personal story and any actual emotions and fear and pain that was like associated with that. And something I've said for a really long time is, even though public speaking is like most people's greatest fear, I fear not public speaking. I fear not sharing my story. I fear not having the opportunity to really go out in the world and amplify the things that I think are deeply important to like raising consciousness in general and just bringing the collective back together. But yes, thank you for the opportunity to plug my program, by the way, because this is like, it's like my heart and soul, and I'm going to get really passionate about it.
No, please.
Like pineapple level passion here.
Please do.
So I have a speaker program called Unapologetic Speaker Training. And about 3.5, 4 years ago now, I started the Unapologetically Her show. And I produced a beautiful event, and I spoke at that event, and I was the only speaker at that event at that time because we didn't know how to plan events. We were just winging it, really, and we didn't know what to do and who do we bring in. We had a moderated guest interview with a celebrity guest at that time, but other than that, I was the only keynote, the only standing speaker. And I had a flood of people come up to me afterwards, flood of women, and say, I want to do what you do. I'm like, you want to plan events and fly celebrities in? Like, sure, but here's the bill. Like, it's really expensive, but go for it. They're like, no, I really want to share my story. I want to speak. And that was, for me, that was the turning point for everything. And now that program is the literal heart and soul of
That's cool.
me, my business, the trajectory, the future of my business is about training speakers. And it really isn't just a program to say, here's how to, because you can go get a book from Indigo that's like how to write a talk or how to deliver a TED talk. You can do all of that stuff, but really figuring out who you are, what's important to you, and why you care about this particular topic so much that you have that deep calling that you can't do anything else until this is shared. That's my role. And that's where we go into like the deep kind of like the deep digging, the deep kind of Deepak stuff. And we mine that out, and then we craft it and wordsmith it in a way that makes people literally have those transformational moments where their life is never the same now because they've actually lived at least one element of their purpose. And it's a profound experience. It's something I don't take for granted. It's a real privilege.
Yeah, it was super honored to be able to do the sound for that show. And when I was listening to them all speak, they had me in tears. I was like, this is amazing.
It's crazy
how duck out the back.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to do like air quotes. These are regular people. These are not celebrities. They're not well known. You don't know those names until they perform on stage. And they've never, in a lot of cases, never been given the opportunity, because we're always looking at people with like giant media followings and giant like Instagram accounts. And those people are getting hired. Their story is flipping everywhere. It's on their Instagram feed, it's in their blogs, it's on stages, it's all over the place. Like, we know that they've had their opportunity. And I really want to I want to dig deeper. I want those people that haven't had the opportunity, because no education without opportunity is my tagline for that program. Like, if you're going to get trained, I'm going to put you on a damn stage. You are going to go out and do it. You are going to get into action, because you just aren't going to have that feeling. You aren't going to have the feedback that you're looking for to push through that unworthiness piece that we were talking about before. If you don't get that validation, you don't get that feedback.
Totally.
Look at me. I'm like, I can't even breathe. I'm so passionate about
That's amazing.
I love it. I think that
Like
it's like,
gasping for
there's a
air
couple
over
things you said there that were just...
It's the mask.
Yeah.
Probably is the mask.
Pause, breathe. There's a couple things you said there, though, that are just, they're fascinating to me. And it's like, one of the things that these guys have heard me say a ton, and every client that I've ever worked with hears a ton, and they get sick of it, is that we're dying for transparency, authenticity, and empathy. We're just dying for those things. We also are way smarter than we give ourselves credit for. So a lot of times when I work with people, clients, businesses, whoever it may be, and they're like, we have a shit following, it's probably because your following knows that you're lying. And when I say that, I mean, you're not...
Or you're like me and you never show up online ever.
or
Which is also
is
a problem, apparently.
People, when I say lying, it's a harsh word to say that you're telling a story, you're trying to be something versus just being yourself.
That's right.
And it's because we fixate so much on what people do. We talked about this a little earlier, that when we meet people, we instantly, because we've been trained since we were young, and we hear it all the time, that when you meet somebody, you instantly go into what you do versus who you are. And actually, one of the cool things that I think it was Josh brought up one time at a podcast, he's like, sometimes when you do ask somebody how they're doing, you need to be prepared that they might say, I'm actually doing pretty shitty.
100.
And if you're not prepared for that, I think sometimes that's why we go to the just downside.
Because it's not an honest way to open the conversation. Because if the person isn't going to be open with you, oh, I'm fine, I'm also fine.
So we see online these people that live these lives, and I'm heavily invested in telling the stories, which is why I want to tell real, true, authentic, pure, empathetic stories.
Totally.
And honest, like really honest stories. So when we see people that are living these lives, and we go, well, I guess my story is nothing, they don't understand. You mentioned mining, and I was like, oh, it's such a wicked word to say, because that's it, is that people don't understand that, like, a lot of times and again, to me, I'm going to use the word bravery, because to me, when I watch people, a lot of times in my life, people look at things that I did with skateboarding and sports and stuff, and I grew up playing soccer every day of the week as well.
Oh, really?
That's why. My dad actually sent me a message the other day. He's like, watching Bayern Munich play, most beautiful sport in the world. And I was like, probably a hockey player is going to say, watching hockey. And he's like, oh, I miss you playing. I was like, I don't miss getting wrecked all the time.
That's funny.
And, but anyways, going back to like, talking to my daughter about like being brave, and when I was growing up, people would always look at things that I did, and they're like, I can't believe you just did that. That's so brave. I can't believe you just did that. That's so brave. And it really just fucked with my mentality about what bravery was, because
interesting.
I think that in my mind, I had practiced, and that was very calculated. It wasn't brave to me. That was calculated. I did not do those things just on the first. There were some stupid things that I did, and that's what I called stupidity. So then I had that mixed into bravery, and was thinking, so the stupidity and the calculations, but that's bravery. But I was like, but then as I started to grow up and be like, oh my goodness, like, my wife is the deepest empathetic person I've ever met, and my soul just opened up to her. And all of a sudden, when I'm here trying to explain to her how much I love her, and I am scraping the bottom of my soul, and it is not coming out in any coherent language, and I was like, holy shit, this is bravery.
Yeah.
And it's like, and anybody that in my life that has ever gone through counseling or therapy or anything, that is absolutely brave. Bravery isn't throwing a punch at somebody in a fight. That's just stupidity, or calculated, depending on how you look at it. But going into a situation where you're like, I'm going to completely be open. I'm going to allow these layers, the mining, to happen. I don't know what's coming. That's terrifying. And I've been there so many, it was one of the things that also healed me from my insomnia, was actually 100% engaging in that, I want to use the word revelation almost, but I don't know what the right word would be for it, but it was exposing and very because I had no clue what to expect. And I think that's one of those things, like when I heard you say like mining, that's the difference between here's the story we're going to tell and here's the real story. That's right. That real story can be pretty, it can be ugly, it can be all of them together, but it is, you sense the purity behind it, that transparency and that authenticity. And that's also super terrifying and scary. Yeah, totally. So that's why a lot of times, going back to what I was saying earlier about, talking to my daughter about being brave, is it's like we really, I had something that I wanted to talk about, like strong, because I know we were talking about strong, but I wrote this quote down because society often tells us that it's the strong who are worthy, and being strong is about how independent you are, how little you need others, and letting your emotions show. And I thought, like when I was growing up in sports, all of those things, it was, you didn't let your emotions show, yet I was an incredibly emotional person. A lot of these people then, too, you realize that you're talking about, we don't know what they've grown up with, and we don't know their parents or whoever, like their guardians did the best they could at the time, but you don't know what you're dealing with. So when you're mining, you're also then kind of in a counseling aspect of it too, where
it is permanent counseling. Even as a podcast host, I think it does function. Not that I'm giving therapy to my guests by any means. They are fantastic storytellers and guests, and they don't need me to be dishing them out counseling. But it does take on that role of being interested enough to go deeper than what they're actually saying. Yeah. And you talk about bravery. I think storytelling is one of the bravest things that anyone can really do, especially when it's a personal story. But I think the misconception is that bravery is in the absence of fear. Or in absence of fear, in some way. It's like, I'm just going to fearlessly throw myself off this bridge. And then we look at that
in spite of the fear.
In spite of, right? It really is actually, I personally believe that bravery cannot exist without fear. That in order to reach a place of bravery, we actually have to have the fear, notice the fear, see the fear, analyze the fear, and then actually decide that we're going to act in spite of it. Somebody in the back said that before I did. So if we cultivate this, I mean, I generally joke that I am fear's PR person, because I love a good like embrace of the things that really scare us, because it teaches us literally everything about who we are. There's nothing in our world, nothing in your life, my life, in all of our worlds that is not directly guided by our fear instinct. We're all in survival mode. We're like little creatures running around trying to figure out how to best live, how to literally stay alive in the best way possible. So if we are fascinated enough by human beings, and I certainly am, you sound like you are, just ask yourself, like, what feedback did they receive as a child that scared them? What was really frightening? So for you, I would think maybe something about listening, somebody not hearing you, or you're talking and then there's a gap. So there's a shutdown that happens if you're not being heard.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
It's like I wasn't being heard when I wanted to share my voice, and somebody wasn't listening. And therefore now, if I get feedback, if I receive similar feedback that I'm not being heard, shutdown mode. So it's just that constant wondering, I guess. And this is where I become like a crazy person, because I'm so fascinated by human behavior.
Have you always been like that?
I think I've always been like that. And in fact, you mentioned earlier about, we've already dropped the name Oprah a few times, so I may as well do it again. I remember watching Oprah's final episode of her Oprah Winfrey Show when she closed it. And something that she said at the end of that show was that in 25 seasons, or however many, I'm probably going to butcher all these numbers, that the one thing she learned of all the guests, no matter who they were, is that everybody just wants to be heard. They just have a story and they want to be heard. And I'm probably not quoting this properly, but go back and listen to it. It's just phenomenal, this thing. I can remember hearing that this is probably a decade and a half ago. I was very young at the time, and I certainly wasn't in counseling work or coaching or anything I was doing then. I was probably marketing beer or something, slinging beer in bars. And
so counseling.
Basically counseling. That's exactly. That was my training program, coach training. Yeah. I legitimately remember hearing that, and it rung a bell in me. Like, I knew that I already knew that. So I don't know why. When you hear things, and I always say your memories are always tied to emotions, deep emotions. So if I can remember every word of that, the way I can remember what Baby Spice said in 1999 about girl power, because it rung true for me, and it's because I knew it was true. And it really was like, it stuck with me. And I have carried that through my life in a way that I really let that be my goalpost always, and my guiding like light, I guess I could say, is in all my interviews and all the work I do, is like, people just want to be heard. They just want to be heard.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that can work with anything from like, personal relationships to like even in someone's business, like your customers. Like, that's the only way to make them happy is like have them, like, I know for my day job, like I have to make them feel like they're heard and I understand their problem, even if I'm like might not fully care. You have to make them feel like you do, and then they'll be happy, right? But like in like more of a personal aspect, like I'm the same way. If as you too, if I feel like someone's not listening, you do kind of shut down, right? Right.
And we do one of the two, right? We're like, we either shut down or we like go way up. We're in that ego mode. We're like in behavioral ego, like we're gonna fight.
Yeah, and that's something that I think, like, not to cut you off, but like growing up, definitely you nailed it, because like growing up in my family, it was very, if you wanted to be heard, you just went louder, and so that was, you either fought to be heard, which then you really weren't heard, because at that point then, the part of your brain that you wanted to actually speak from was not working anymore because you were in the fight mode.
That's right.
And so, your amygdala, I think it is like going full tilt, and you're not even paying attention to anything. And so now it's like, what was I even saying? Because now I'm just in fight mode, and now my voice is elevated. I'm not too sure why. So then it gets really like messed up with that aspect of like wanting to share something from your heart and share something that you're feeling, and realizing like you have to, it's coming from this part of the brain, but then this part of the brain has to work in order to get back to this one, but then now you're forgetting about, and anyways, you just go so long. And then I realized now that I have my girls are 8 and 3, that for years my wife and I worked on dealing with our shit pre-kids, because I wanted them to be the purest version of themselves, not just repeats of my shit. Totally. And also all the, like, as you mentioned, like there's other things there, but it's things like the wounds or the things that had happened to me or the things that I thought were who I am, but it was just stuff I'd never dealt with, or I didn't even know the name of how to deal with it or even the way to deal with it. which is why I've always really praised people that take counseling and therapy, and why it's something that I think is like, we go to the gym. I don't understand why people don't have therapy memberships, which maybe therapists,
right?
I don't know if they have those or not.
New business plan,
That
guys.
would be awesome. Yeah.
Did you bring your punch
Heard it here
card?
first.
Let's cut
my
that out.
God.
That's too good of an idea.
Yeah. But it is.
Edit, cut.
Oh yeah, but it's something that to me, it's like, my wife and I have been talking a lot about just the disconnect of the mind and the body in the world, but yet our mind and body are connected, and how much those things affect us. And so getting out of the way when I've got two little eyes constantly, like my daughter's looking at me, I don't want to just also go silent and not have a response. Like you're saying, I want to come back with them and say, like, I'm really sorry, actually. This is what I'm trying to not do this. So I appreciate that you guys bring it to my attention. It doesn't hurt my feelings because I know you love me. That's one thing too that I realized, my wife and I early on is we're very observant people. And I would watch people in my life. She would as well. And we'd go sit and just observe and watch people. And we noticed that people that fought, they weren't using the right part of their brain. And we could see that as soon as it got into fight mode, it was just about being right. Winning the fight. It wasn't even about being right. That's what I meant to say. And so we talked about what that could look like for us in our communication, because she's very sensitive, and so am I. And so we looked at, like, well, what if we were to, like, set some ground rules before we start discussing things, so that as well that, because we all know that when we get heated, sometimes we'll say things that we don't mean.
Mm-hmm.
And, I said to her, I was like, it would destroy me. I've cried about this, because if I ever said something that she felt I deliberately meant to, like, say to her that was, like, super hurtful and painful,
Just getting a dig in for
crush me.
the sake of digging.
Like, I would never deliberately ever say anything to offend her, ever. And so we took that right off the table and said, no. So here's the thing. I want you to have the freedom when we're having a conversation to be you. And I'm also the kind of person, I'm not sure what you're like, but I'm also the kind of person that I'll throw something out there because I don't know it. I know enough to know that I don't know a lot.
Right.
So I want to throw it out to you, because I want to hear what you have to say to help me formulate my thought and go, like, so I'm going to throw something out there. And so I remember saying, even as an artist, we talked about this before, that kind of jibber jabber that we use when we're writing that you don't even know you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, when you're scraping the bottom of your soul, like, literally there are words. Hence when I was saying, like, moms and, like, mothers that deliver, there is the word strong. And we've talked about that word.
Yes.
But then there is delivering babies strong.
Yep.
That is not the right word. It is like, I can't even come up with the word right now. I've never felt such a depth of strength. It's just not the right word.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah,
And I think
it's superhuman, really.
It is. It really is.
We've probably heard the stories of mothers who, like, lift cars off their children. Like, that's what we're talking about
Would it
here.
be conviction? Is that a better word?
No.
Do you know what? I think it is. It's actually the fight or flight response is what it is. Like, it's part of that survival mechanism where you can actually activate superhuman strength. So superhuman strength is probably what I would call it, because it transcends what most human beings would consider strong. It completely and utterly scrambles that definition and reapplies it into something that is super. It's superbly bigger than what we can even imagine.
It's funny because I usually can come up with a word at least, but I remember tears in my eyes looking at my wife as she's delivering, and this is like both girls, and just being like this insane flood of emotions of like I knew how in love I was with her and how strong she's the strongest woman I know, like unbelievably strong. Then that was happening and I was like,
you're like, I will never measure up ever.
And I will never I will never
Okay.
measure up ever. And I will never ever complain about a cold.
No.
Right?
It was honestly the most phenomenal thing. Like, it was absolutely incredible. But anyways, going back to what I was saying about communication. So when I'm scraping the bottom of my soul, I said, like, I may say some things that might come across. Like, I wanted her to have the freedom as well. So it was reciprocated. And like, in a mutually beneficial relationship, obviously we want to be able to have the freedom to be able to communicate. But it was like, I don't want to worry also that I'm offending you, because then I will actually filter what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And I don't want you to do the same thing, because I want what's in your soul to come out. Yeah. And so I'm prepared. And there was times where you're hearing things where like, and so you're just like, oh my goodness. So it's, if I get offended, it's my fault, because we've already talked about this. She's not, and I'm not deliberately doing it. And we've never we fell in love. So I met her, she was in grade 6, I was in grade 8, fell in love at 15, 17. We've been together ever since, and we've never fought once. We've had lots of discussions, but that worked for us, where it was like, for us, our communication style, it was a way that we were able to go in. And I desperately love that in story. That's why to me, like when people like open up and share their story, their real story, not the story that they want to share that they think is going to be like the Hollywood version, but their real story. Going originally back to what I was saying about influencers is they're showing, because I've seen it happen, it's a pitched story that they think will attract. But we're over that. We don't want that. We want the transparency. We want the authenticity. We want the empathy, because we want to engage in your life and have you join our lifestyle, our culture. Yeah. But we're smarter than a lot of times what these people who are making up the stories think. And that's where I get fascinated with people, which is why my feeds are so different than others. Sometimes it's hilarious because the majority of it is just my client stuff. But it actually really fascinates me then, because I dive deep for my clients and I literally put on their hat, their everything, and I am them. And so it's interesting for me to see who their story attracts. And that's something that is like, it keeps me up late at night, early in the mornings, but I love, because when they say, no, this is who I am, like, actually I get to go on and I can take a look and see what your audience is, your community is actually saying, if you do have a community. It's a fascinating thing for me. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. As you can tell, it's like in my life's work.
Yeah, there's so much to it.
There's so much to it. And sometimes it's just, as we talked about, it's like observing, again, what is the human behavior? Yeah. Because one of the questions I constantly ask myself and that I'm watching for, which is very disarming for people in my world, I think, is that I witness the way somebody behaves. I witness the way they show up. I witness the way they act. And what I know is, and the question that I kind of ask myself is, what kind of person, or what would a person have to have experienced in order to behave in this way or act in this way? Yeah. Because under behavior is feeling, and then under feeling is need, right? So if we can get to that, we just look at the way people are acting, like the way, see, you're shutting down if people don't listen to you. I'm like, well, that's a behavior. I'm like, so immediately I go, there's sadness and fear under that, because clearly somebody in his past was not hearing him or wasn't listening to him. The deeper need is I need to be heard, but also that's that deeper need for acceptance, right? And feeling that love. So noticing just the way people act without judgment, literally stepping out of judgment from it, as you said with you and your wife and the way you engage, it's like, I see what you're doing. I'm not going to kind of center myself in this and say it's clearly you offending me or hurting me purposely, but you're behaving in a way because there's a feeling underneath that. And if we get really deeply curious about that as storytellers, we can reach any audience. And I often say to my speakers, they'll come through the program, and there's many people. I work with authors too, partner with the self-publishing agency, many authors who are publishing books, and they will come kind of at the front end of their journey and say, so much of my story is rooted in the story of another person, a parent or a sibling. And I don't want to hurt that person. I don't want to tell that part of the story, but I need to kind of, in order to tie these threads together. They said, well, yes and no. Sure, we probably want to know all of the different facets of who you are. That would be probably a really interesting memoir. But the feelings underneath that arose for you, especially when you're developing a keynote, can be translated from any story. So if you take a story about a parent who didn't hear you, and there's a deeper need for love or belonging, I could tell that same story of love and belonging, talking about an observation I made of a family of raccoons crossing the road. You could say, look at that family of raccoons, and the baby raccoon got his foot stuck in a plastic bag and couldn't catch up and started squealing. I could tell that same theme of love and belonging and fitting in a different way. So if we get curious about that, we can really be very dynamic storytellers and still be able to connect to multiple audiences. But we do have to understand that actions are not everything. Actions are just the way we show up. As you say, the role, the job that we play, the posh spice, the baby spice. Underneath that, what are the deeper themes there? What's the deeper feeling? And
why was Scary Spice scared? You know,
or scary.
So deep. We're going deep now.
Yeah, it's funny. Even with lyrics, like writing lyrics back in the day, I felt like I wouldn't really let myself be myself because I'd be like, my grandma's gonna hear this. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah, I'd be like, I don't want to say it. I can't say that.
That's really funny. I never thought. I also think too that we underestimate the power of the imagination, and I think that's one aspect to storytelling. Like, I have a rough time. Like, I love reading. I hated it growing up. Love it now. Like, I can't get enough of reading. And it's one of those things that I actually struggle with, like, writers who will over-explain things and take my imagination away from me. And I'll go, you're killing this for me. Like you're doing so much explaining that you're not allowing me to come up with my own
Filling in the blanks.
Oh, it drives me through the roof. And it's funny because other people are like, really? You think of it? I'm like, oh, I overthink everything. So it's like,
That's funny.
But I can't stand that aspect. Or like if I'm watching a movie and it's the same thing, I'm like, you don't think I get this?
That's funny. Annie does that to me when I'm telling her story, like halfway through, like I'm getting to the end and she already knows where I'm going. She's like, okay, yeah, I get it.
That's awesome.
I can absolutely picture her voice doing that.
Okay, yeah.
Speed it up, things to do.
Land the plane,
Places to go.
But that power of using your imagination, it's one of those things that we don't realize. And I love that you're helping to educate people and to bring people through that journey and to encourage them in it, is that storytelling changes lives.
Totally.
And I am so fortunate that I grew up, like, even for myself, like my Opa was a storyteller. And as a little kid, like at the church that's even near me, I remember like on Sundays, he was telling stories. Like he was always during the service before the kids would leave or whatever it was, like he would bring everybody down, he would tell stories and do sound effects. And that's what I grew up with, was a storytelling Opa. And like, so I have it in me since I've been born to just always be, he would always be telling us stories and like engaged. Like I just remember sitting, just listening to him, just super engaged in the story.
That's cool.
And using my imagination. And that's where, you know, I tell people like, there's power in storytelling. And I said, like, look at, I've cried watching cartoons with my girls. It's not even real.
The beginning of Finding Nemo.
But the story is so powerful.
It's very
And
sad.
and it's interesting because they actually do know as well that the same parts of your brain that are ignited or come alive with emotion when you're watching a real story are activated with a cartoon. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So actually the cool thing that I'm learning about right now, which is just fascinating me, is allowing using your imagination to heal as well, which has been blowing my mind. Because again, it's one of those things like when you become curious, and also I do want to pass these things on to my girls. Like I love that you nailed that behavioral thing, because yeah, it's 100% that in my life. And realized for the longest time I'd say things like, you know, when you hear certain people say like, oh, well, that's just and then they'll say like Italian in us, or that's just the German in us. And I remember growing up being like, or the asshole.
Yeah, or the dick, yeah.
Right? You're that's just being a dick, like not treating. And I don't want to pass along that behavioral thing in my life of me, just because. And so that's where sometimes I get really frustrated myself, that I feel like I'm farther along in my journey in my life, and then triggers come along or things happen where I'm like, oh, I got to deal with this stuff. And I don't want to pass it on. Because behavioral stuff, it's crazy how hard it is to break those habits.
Totally. You got to change the feedback, right? Because the feedback you receive of being loud and boisterous and rude or whatever, however you define that, at one point or another, that made sense to that person because it made them belong somewhere. They were receiving feedback that said, the more you are like this, the more you are welcome here.
Yeah.
That's all it is. Like, human beings are so simple. We're so simple. We just want to belong. We just want to be connected. And so we're constantly like shifting and moving and little chameleons with our behavior to figure out, if I do this behavior, what is the feedback I'm going to receive?
Yeah.
We're really that simple.
Totally.
So at some point with our kids, we just change the feedback. If that's not, we don't really want that behavior here, let's not give them positive feedback where we high five them and say, good job. Keep up that swearing routine around here, right? You know,
fucking A.
Join us at the table. Like, more cake for you. We just change the feedback, which is kind of the nature of discipline and things as well, too, right? And positive reinforcement and stuff. It's all psychological things that we do with children anyway, most of which we don't even think about. But it's the same is true for adults as well.
Yeah, I still learn better with positive reinforcement. Like,
we all do.
When someone gets all like shitty with me, I'm like, oh, I shut down. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. You've been doing a great job with that, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
I also think you're doing a great job.
Oh, thanks, guys.
And that's our show.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm glowing.
Those are the notes that he gave you guys to say about him?
Yeah.
Yes.
At some point
Thanks,
tonight,
Josh.
give me some praise, please.
Don't forget the other one.
Yeah.
What was the other one? About my hair. I wanted to go back to, you're talking about self-publishing. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, this is such a fun story, and again goes back to like connection and the way that we relate to other people and meet other people. But when I first started my speaker training program, which was about 3 years ago, at the time I invited a publisher to come in and talk to the women that were in the program, because I figured, if you're going to tell a story, let's teach you how to take it from page to stage and back again, because stories have to live, as you know, in multiple different places all the time. It has to be amplified all over the place. And so I had kind of cold called this Vancouver it was called the Self-Publishing Agency. It's still called the Self-Publishing Agency. And I talked to Megan, who's a CEO there. She picked up my call, which was lovely. And we kind of vetted each other over the phone. We kind of did some like back and forth about whether or not it would be a right fit. And she drove out and gave a workshop that night. And we have been deeply connected ever since. We just made sense to each other in a big way. So she moonlighted in that program for all of the cohorts that we've had. And during COVID, when the event world was shut down, I was kind of scrambling and like, what is my business going to do right now? Like, as we all did, we had to pivot like pretty quick out of that event space. And I jumped on the phone with Megan again, and we started to kind of like cultivate that partnership. And I ended up becoming really kind of a storytelling coach with the authors and doing author branding with them. So really going deep in their story and saying, why are you writing this book of all the things that you love? And no, why this book, why you, and why now? That's really the deeper inquiry that I do with authors. But the self-publishing world is just absolutely fascinating. It is people and storytellers who are tired of the gatekeepers, frankly, in the publishing community and in the big trade publishing community, and really just want to wrap their arms around their own story and self-belief and say, I'm actually just going to put it down on paper. I'm going to put it out there. So this has been really, really gratifying to me to work with authors who are just in that zone of like, I'm ready to roll. I want this story out in the world and I'm going to do it my way. And the beautiful thing about the self-publishing agency is that it's professional publishing, even though it's self-publishing. So very cool. Professional level editing and design and print and all the things that would make it look like any beautiful trade book.
How awesome is that? To
Fiction,
be able to do
non-fiction?
It is the coolest experience, I'll tell you. It's really,
That's
really
so
great.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been super fun.
Does it cover like fiction and non-fiction, the people who work with that agency?
Anything you want, because it's self-publishing, whatever your story is. If it's a business manual, I've worked with business authors, worked with memoirs, worked with children's books. We just did a cookbook with Becky, our mutual friend.
Yeah.
A 90s playlist cookbook, actually.
Just listened
90s
to that podcast.
music. Yeah, it was phenomenal. Anyway, all kinds of beautiful books. So anything you want to publish, you literally can. In fact, we're doing a deck of affirmation cards for a client right now. So anything that you can print on paper and may need words for can basically be done. So
that's cool. And are they going to get into doing like audiobooks for people like me who do the audiobooks, like for self-publishing?
Yeah, such a great question. We're kind of like dipping our toe into that right now a little bit, but what we're finding, the audiobook market is a bit of an odd one because it's just a bit of an odd market. It's finding listeners and getting downloads and which programs and the cost to actually put it on these programs. What we have found has been much more effective, frankly, and here's my plug, is speaker training. Is when you want to amplify your story using your voice, putting it on a stage, developing a keynote, pulling out those themes and being able to take a 50,000 word memoir and shrink it down to a 1,500 word keynote talk is a skill that is, it's pretty big. Yeah. And, you know, this is my toot my horn moment, but this is what I do. And I love doing it because once you have that core story of like, why this book, why now, why me, that can live on a TED stage. It can live on your own event. It can live in a podcast recording, private audio recording. You could do an audiobook stream. Anyway, the limitless opportunities.
What if you could do like, I'm just so curious because it's like a lot of those people that get into it too, like an author doesn't necessarily get into wanting to be a public speaker. So it's a cool thing that you're having this opportunity to like help them, because that's the world we live in now though, is, you know, I can only imagine like you write this book and you've poured absolutely every piece of yourself into it. So if I want to get to know this person's story, go read the fucking book.
Yeah.
But then it's like, no, get on stage. It's like, wait, what? Like, and from this person who it's like, you know, is it going to be as good as what? Like, I think it's phenomenal that you're doing that, because there's so many, to me, like that's the marketing aspect. I instantly go to, oh, well, there's YouTube for the opportunity for them to get to know them and to talk about this and to go a little bit deeper and to go that. And like, and again, it's just to all strengthen the community and to tell their story. And that's where, like, I've listened to maybe a couple audiobooks because I do like reading. But really, in reality, they are like a podcast, like when you get a chance to listen and stuff. And I think that it always reminds me, there's been times, again, where I get thrown off by someone's voice or something because I have my imagination goes wild and I go, I'm just going to read it.
I prefer an English accent.
Yeah?
But the holistic psychologist, she's reading her book, which is really cool because it's her voice, which I really like.
Yeah. I think it's great you're doing that, though, because I do think that would be something that is absolutely essential, is for people to get up and to be able to share. Because all it does is even giving like little heartfelt teasers.
So cool.
Like you mentioned, like getting up there and sharing it just goes, I want to hear more.
Yeah.
Right? Like I want to dive deeper into that.
And like with any project, if at some point somebody hands you a microphone, invites you onto a podcast, or calls you onto the global news stage to talk about it, or even a bigger stage than that, you better know what you're saying.
Yeah.
And when you know, you don't have to develop a keynote as much as you better know how to tell the story of your book. So whether it's an author that I'm working with, or even if it's a speaker, or I work with a lot of businesses and brands and people building brands, the first thing I ask most people is, tell me about your fill in the blank. Tell me about your book. Tell me about your podcast. And most people cannot give me a succinct answer about what they're doing and what they're talking about.
Their little elevator pitch.
Elevator pitch. Like, what is your business? I keep looking at the ceiling like these voices are coming from the start.
We make them sit up there.
Just little elves. Like,
I'm everywhere and nowhere.
We give him scraps and he lives in the attic.
I don't know. I keep looking, but it is
you're
marketing. It's marketing. You need to know how to talk about your projects. So public speaking is not really a privilege for people who are self-published. It's kind of, it's a need. You're going to need to know how to talk about your project, because you are now effectively an entrepreneur. As you are as a podcast host, as you are as a business owner. At some point, your wife does this beautifully. You have to tell the story of what your business is, or what your book is, or who's going to...
No, you're nailing it. Absolutely nailing it.
Who's going to go to YouTube if they don't know you?
So true.
Like, we haven't even got there yet.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely nailing it. It's amazing how many opportunities I get to sit with businesses where I ask them, and we were talking about this earlier, we'll ask somebody about, okay, tell me about your business, about who you are. And they'll list everything they do. And I'm like, oh, I get that. Like, that's very clear. I get what you do, but we want to know more. And the one thing that we don't realize too is a lot of times getting on stage and sharing a bit of your story. Your community wants to get to know you. They want to support you. They want this, but they need to get to know you. So how do you do that? And again, that's going to change too for each like unique situation that you're in. But it's like entering into a room and realizing, holy smoke, there's a lot of people here. And so what do I do? It's like, usually it's like you need to, and I always say like reaching out your hand, like you need to be the initiator. And what does that look like? And we do that through storytelling. And a lot of times it puts people, especially too when we can be empathetic and we're able to like, to shed our layers a little bit first, it puts others at ease. Yeah. And it allows them to kind of take a breath. And it's not about posturing up. It's not about what you do now. It's okay to actually say like, oh yeah, no, I've kind of felt like that too. And you'll notice that people will feel a lot more calm. But we don't think a lot of times, what I've found as well in the marketing world, not just marketing in general, but just life in general, is that like my wife and I always use the analogy of play chess, is making strategic moves as we go, versus a lot of times it's like, all right, we just want to explode right now. And that's the big thing. Like, did this go viral? How many likes did it get? This, and it's fixating on the wrong metrics. And it's actually something in my life that I'm realizing with a lot of clients as well, and just human beings in general, is that we have just the totally improper metrics. Became very aware of it when we watched people kind of go through the midlife crisis of like, wait a minute, all of those things that you thought were the metrics that were success and that were going to make you happy are not bringing you true happiness in any way. So those metrics were off. So you just spent your entire 55 years going after that metric, which brought you like nothing. Yeah. So maybe I need to learn from that. And realizing too that it's like, metrics to me, like when people talk about like, we got to just do this and this post, it's got to get as many likes as possible. It's like, really? Like that's what your metrics are? Like you're basing it off that? Or how about that one person that like, connects with you through a DM that's a genuine, like that is a proper metric. And so teaching people about marketing that, I'll say like, we were having a meeting the other day, and I do this with our large clients all the way down to our smaller scale clients. And to me, they're exactly the same. As I'd rather have 100 truly invested community members than, 30,000. So it looks amazing, but are just bullshit. Yeah. And that's something that I think people don't realize too, is when they're on stage and they're speaking, that connection, that like who knows if they'll ever write another book, or if that person might be like, I was thinking about getting that book, but I wasn't sure. And you speak, they're like, oh, I'm in. And not only the book, but whatever you do, I'm going to support you. That's right. Because you shared your story in a true and authentic way. And it is very scary to open up in that way, especially when it's hard enough for people to write it down on page. Yeah.
It's kind of neat because in a way, it's almost like, Pineapple Sound, the studio, we allow, like there's a lot of people who've been working on like a song for years and years, and it's their story. It's the only way they know how to tell it. And then sometimes it's like they save up for a long time or however long, and then they want to do an album or go into a studio and do it. And it's really cool to be able to help them in a way tell that story and portray it the way they want to. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I mean, I said this earlier. It feels like a real privilege. Like I really do walk around in my life and go, how did I really get so lucky to be facilitating storytelling with such profound, powerful storytellers? It's really quite something. It's amazing.
I was blown away at that, like just every single one of them. And it's interesting how you connect to different people, right? Like when Mel did hers, I was like, oh, I felt that. She had me going pretty good.
She had my mom in absolute puddles.
She did amazing.
Puddles,
No, it was really good. I was like in the back because I'm checking for sound, and I'm like got the in-ear, and I'm just like, I'm okay. It's okay. I'm gonna hide
Did
it.
somebody peel an onion in here? I think so.
My eyes are just sweaty.
I love that.
Yeah, there really wasn't like a dry eye in the room. And like, you know, if we talk about metrics, I kind of use that as a measure because I love to like pull emotion out of people. I like to see people feel. And I've had at the end of every cohort that I teach, we always do a mini event. And then of course we have the big annual one where the speakers all perform and I weave together their stories and create this kind of collaborative talk, which is really cool. But at the end, they all perform. And I remember somebody saying to me at the end of one of these events, they said, oh, I'm exhausted, the audience member. And I was like, I said, good. Yeah. Because that means you freaking felt something and you allowed yourself to take in these stories. Because imagine, again, we are the feedback and we have a collective responsibility to be providing better feedback, which is how we destigmatize things. Yeah. As audience members, watching your loved one or your friend or whoever, anyone you're inspired by, tell their story, they've been carrying that around for a long time. They're pretty exhausted carrying it around with a lot of stigma over them that we've contributed to as a society, right? Can we take that on for a day for them? Can we be a little exhausted, actually? Can we just absorb that and validate for them that their experience has been really fucking tough? Yeah, like that feels so meaningful to me to really feel. And over time, the more you hear a story and the more you become aware and you unravel and unzip and stuff, you're not as, I think, you don't break down in every story. Like now I hear story. See, and I don't, because I now hear everybody and I go, right, yeah, you and everybody else. Okay, let's just get to the heart of it. Like let's move through. And I don't say that with no empathy and no care. I really just know how so freakingly connected we are. That's not a word, freakingly. You can edit
freakingly,
that out.
I like that.
You can freakingly connected.
Can't believe she used a word that's not even a word.
Freakingly. What
is
she?
New
Is
word.
she a writer? Is she a writer?
Totally.
New word discovered.
Frequently Fridays.
We're pioneers here, making up new words.
Pineapple pioneers. Yeah. But it is, I don't even know where I was going with that, but we're just so connected that nothing surprises me anymore is probably a better way to say that.
I think also
nothing
too, you've got, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, but learning about the different types of empathy as well is that I'm still learning. And for me as a storyteller, my life has been in tears and it's made me what's so effective and so good. I literally take on, as I mentioned earlier, when I'm working for you, like I am you and I will be you. And I love doing that, but it is absolutely exhausting. It's something that, I mean, I've had the pleasure of, holy smoke, like telling stories for the biggest of the big all the way down and taking on all of it and realizing that, you know, I remember hearing this analogy of, say, like, you know, the type of empathy that I experience is like, you don't need to be drowning in order to save somebody from drowning. And so I think with what you're saying is there's different levels. There's empathic, there's cognitive, and it's like, it's still sharing. You still have empathy. You just realize that I'm more effective in this way with, say, cognitive empathy or empathic or whatever it may be. Because, yeah, you're right. Like there's times where I actually, won't say who it was for, but it was like one of the most hardest shoots that I ever went through. I went up to the client and I was like, I haven't taken a photo. I haven't done anything yet. They're like, really? I'm like, I can't. This is like, I feel so honored you've allowed me to be here. But like what the content was that was happening, and it was like, it was history making. And I was like, I can't. I'm just like, and they were like, that's why we've hired you. And it was like, I bawled, even editing. Like there's been times where my voice come down and I'm like, but I'll say that on the positive side too, there's times where I'm like, I can't stop smiling because of the story, my face, and I'm by myself in the dark office editing and I'm just smiling away. And I'm like, also I'll stop myself like, oh my goodness. And there's nobody around, but because it invokes that like emotion in me.
I love that too.
And that's the thing though, that's a good story. So there is a level that I'm learning in my life now, which I've gotten a lot better at, is turning those dials and how to balance those dials. Because I mean, balance is another one of those things that's just incredibly difficult, but I can see where you're coming from. And that's something that I think is great. I think you've learned like so much about how to do that, because if you were just absolutely blabbering and bawling and this, like, you wouldn't be effective on that day for who's there that needs you. And some people may need you as that rock as well, to be like, she's my barometer. I need her because I'm terrified right now. And you're still showing empathy. And that's something that I'm learning is feelings, like, you're talking about, like, yeah, it's getting hot and I get worried. It's like, feelings are meant to be felt. I fucking felt, man, like truly felt to their core. We've just learned that it's like, oh, you're feeling anxious. You shouldn't feel that way. Like, we have a pill for that.
Yeah, take a deep
And it's
breath.
like, but wait a minute. Like, or like there's other feelings too. It's like, I'm feeling like this. Oh, we shouldn't be feeling that way too. Like somewhere along the lines, we've decided to say, like, these are the feelings that guys are allowed to feel. I'll just use this for now because
Yeah, it's a great example.
right? Like, and this is the feelings
There's a
they're
lot of
allowed to
that,
feel. And it's
for
like,
sure.
but it's like, what are you talking about? Like, because we talked about this earlier about the struggles that I even felt as an artist, athlete, all these things. Like, well, you're either an athlete or an artist. It's like, you're one or the other. And I'm like, I guess I'm neither. And just being like, I guess I'm neither. So what the hell? Like, and not knowing, what to do. And then you add feelings to that. And like the age, we're talking about 15 years old, and like how hard of a time that is alone with just puberty alone. Like, take everything else out of it and just try to go through puberty and make it through and be a good human when you come out of it. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, and I think that it's like, I am super proud of the work that you're doing with people to give
awesome.
them
Thank you.
the tools
That's very
and
kind.
stand alongside and say, like, listen, like, your story, we need to hear. Cause it's one thing that when I talk to my girls about what they want to be when they grow up, they'll tell you that they want to be happy. That's what they want to be.
That's
when they grow
cool.
up. But it's more than that.
Yeah.
It's meaning and purpose. And the cool thing is that at 8 and 3, they have a story to tell. It's way better than my story. I am like, every day I'm like, holy, you guys are absolutely incredible. And it just feeds my soul. And I want to get out of the way and help to facilitate them and to lift them up so they can share their pure story, because it just takes stories, and story after story after story changes our world.
Yeah.
And
You got it.
That's where, like, to me, like, I'm really appreciative to you, if that's the way of saying it.
I'm accepting of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I thank you for that,
I'm
because
absorbing.
I wish that, honestly, I think that we should be sitting down with school boards and talking to school boards about how we allow these kids to know you do have a voice, you are being heard. And even if it is the one person that's hearing you, we are hearing you, and it's not falling on deaf ears.
No, it's not. And I would probably wager a guess that the story that brought you to tears in that client situation that you were in was one that was wrought with pain and fear. It was something that probably was a very painful experience that they were sharing. It very likely wasn't them jumping for joy about the happiest moment of celebration in their world.
Yeah.
Right? I would often, I like to say that the pain is our catalyst. The pain is our catalyst for growth and healing, because we really need to feel it. And the reason that, maybe I sound very cold. I'm like, I'm no longer feeling this. Okay, you're just you and everybody else. Okay, move along.
Yeah.
It really is because I have hit the depths. I have been in the darkest of dark places. I have been on the proverbial edge of the bridge many times. And I've done the work to really be like making friends with and embracing the fear and the pain. And the only way through it is to do that. The only way to that next level wisdom. And as you say, I've had numerous conversations in my life with brilliant minds across the globe. One of the most brilliant minds that I've been in conversation with in my life, fortunately, was my mother, is still my mother. And she worked as a career counselor, which should surprise nobody now that you know what I do for a living, but moving people into purpose and giving them opportunity.
That's cool.
So she was a lifelong career counselor, and something she and I talked about recently was just giving human beings a purpose. That's all any of us need, is we need to know why we're here. As conscious beings, we're like, why are we here? Right? What are we doing here? Who are we? What are we supposed to do? What is happiness? What is joy? And we go through this journey of life to figure that out. And the pain is our catalyst. It's like this little springboard and trampoline where we hit that bottom and then we're like, boom. And then we learn something. And then the turning point is service. And service is synonymous with purpose. It's just that's the thing. That's the thing that goes, I've learned something from my painful experience, and now I want to share that with the world in order to change somebody else's life or stop them from feeling that pain. To know they're not alone. This is all storytellers at the core. You are not alone, right? Been there, done that, felt that pain, and now I want to share and be in service. So if we can find what gives people purpose, just give a person a purpose, that's major.
Yeah.
And my mom said to me, career counselor mother said, because I've adopted this through I don't know, osmosis or something from her growing up, I'm sure, this philosophy. And she said, the government was funding my programs for many years. Many years ago, she was taking contracts from the provincial and federal governments to run her programming in order to get people back to work. And she said, of course, in order to earn the contract, we would have to say, yes, we are bringing people to their purpose, but we would scratch out the word purpose and write job. We are bringing people back to work and giving them a job. But what we knew we were doing was providing somebody a purpose. Mm-hmm. And we had to put it in a genre and define it as a role, as you've been talking about, define it as a situation, an identity, and you're going to go to this place, you're going to do this thing and wear this uniform and get this paycheck. And all of those things contribute to our kind of feeling of purposefulness and meaning when we have gainful income. But ultimately, what are we all doing here is we're providing opportunities for people to be in purpose. And I'm going to just, put in parentheses, service, for people to be in service. And if we know, as storytellers, if we know that's what we're doing, we're allowing you to take your pain and turn it into purpose and to give back in some way to one person, 3,000 people, 30,000 people, 1 million people. If we can turn that crank from pain to purpose, that's storytelling.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing too when you think about first of all, I think that's awesome because I know how even doing that just with friends, you know how we were just talking about like what Josh had mentioned that one time about asking somebody like how they're doing, and how many times have you gotten together with a group of friends and you're having a shit day, and all you need is just like that one, like not long, even just a moment to just let your guard down a bit and be like, ugh. But the friendship group, it's just a shits and giggles friendship group, and you're like, oh, like, okay. And I know for myself too, like there was a lot of learning that I had to do, like where I always just assumed every relationship was going to be like that of my wife. Because we were 15 and 17 when we met. We went through a ton of firsts together. So here I have my whole life of like growing up, going through all these struggles, having this amazing listener. And so being able to have this amazing listener, doing all these things together, laughing, it was just this amazing balance. So just assuming that every relationship was going to be like that and being very let down. And as you were talking, I was thinking like, man, like if we could also just teach just friends to be attentive to a friend when you notice a friend, just having like it being, especially during this time, like it's crazy how like the simplest little reach out during the pandemic was like massive. Or like I'll even go like when my wife got Bell's palsy, the tiniest little reach out from me as a husband who was like I felt like I wanted to protect her and be there. Like there's nothing I didn't want to. I still to this day there's nothing that I just want to do everything for her. But having somebody reach out genuinely, not just to go, just give me the scoop about how bad the Bell's palsy is and like I'm on my way. It's like but a real genuine listen. And I think that thing is like there's a place on the stage and there's a place that the stage is the friendship. Where that one time you get a chance to just open up a little bit. And I was so appreciative. I remember, like, I was just telling my wife, like, I was so appreciative that one time somebody showed up at our door and was just bawling, dropping off flowers. That's it. They didn't want to stick around. They didn't want to this. And it just meant so much, that little action of, like, genuinely caring, genuinely wanting to make sure. But interestingly enough, it was because that person had gone through it as well.
It's shocking.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is my not shocked face.
Yeah. So that's where, like, I think as well, like, that, like what you were talking about there is, like, giving purpose is realizing as friends, it's like, learning in our life how to listen and how to be attentive if they really are your friend. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we know that we have the capacity for 1 to 3 real relationships. And ultimately, even in the last little bit, I think it's come down to 1. And of those 1, there is a massive group in the last study that I read that was like, I don't even have one person to tell things when shit hits the fan. Like I don't have anybody. It's
our biggest, I honestly think it's our biggest challenge as human beings. I think there's nothing that I hear about more than people who don't feel like they have close friends, that don't feel like they have community and don't feel like they belong. Yeah. And as the child of immigrants, this rings very true for me. It's like needing to be in a country and in a community where we know nobody and we don't have any family. There's nobody to lean on. You have to literally build this from like the blocks up. You got to start from scratch. The deeper and the importance of that is really profound, and I'm glad you're talking about it. And I think the only advice I have on that really is if you lead with vulnerability, you will receive vulnerability when that person is ready. But in the meantime, they will start to process your vulnerability as part of their feedback. They're going to start to see that it's safe, and so you may not see their courage or vulnerability, you may not see them show up in that way for you, or the way that you need, They might step back. That might trigger something for them. You don't know what
Totally.
their childhood feedback was, right? But you have to start somewhere. You have to be the one to take the lead and to really step in and dip your toe in and say, I'm just going to show up with courage and vulnerability here. I'm going to do the thing that people don't do, particularly as men. I'm going to pull back that layer. I'm going to move away the behaviors and actions and like uncover some of those emotions, like the scary emotions like fear and sadness and anger and frustration and things we never talk about, right?
Yeah.
We all talk about happiness
Yeah. That's
and joy. Everybody talks about
that's the easier thing,
It's
yeah.
so easy. We've done that, been there, done that.
Yeah.
This is why people are struggling, because that's all we've ever talked about is like the celebratory moments, right? The shiny highlight
And it sure
reel.
looks better online, right?
It sure looks
Should
better.
there be like a sad social media where everyone just shows like,
Yeah, do you know what this makes me a weird
I would connect to
person.
that a lot more personally. I'd love to scroll through someone and be like, oh no, okay, I see.
Oh,
Okay, oh, you know what? I
Yep.
get that. That's a lot more.
That feels like
realistic
me.
to me,
Well,
yeah.
listen, as somebody who literally lives with, and I say this very kind of openly now, I live with depression and anxiety. That's not something that I've had in the past. That is something I, in this moment, sitting at this table, have. That's happening in my brain as we speak. So being in moments of sadness is like my way of life. And it's not even sadness, it's like flatness. If you've ever experienced depression, it's kind of just like flat.
The absence of
The
feeling.
absence of really the feel. It's like, I don't really feel anything, actually. I'm just kind of like looking at the world. This maybe explains some of the the boundaries I was talking about before. But truly, like, I think it's a superpower in a way to tap into those feelings and not be afraid of them. Like, this is the bravery thing, right? It's like, let's be with them for a while, long enough to not make them the scary thing that we're afraid of, long enough to learn about them, long enough to turn them into something and make it mean something.
Yeah.
And this may not be true for everybody, but if I can't make my pain mean something else, I can't get past it. If I'm having a bad moment and I can't say, what does this mean? Or what are you making this mean? And what can you remake it mean? Can you make it mean something else? I mean, this is the core of all kind of cognitive behavioral therapy, but just ask yourself, what are you making that mean?
Yeah, thoughts, behaviors, and actions there.
Thoughts, behaviors, actions. And if you understand that human beings, frankly, are just walking around, we are just bundles of behaviors and actions that are hiding and masking a bundle of inner feelings and emotions that is basically masking deeper needs, core needs. Once you know those things, you can read people like a book. There's my plug for the publishing agency again. You can really just read people, and maybe that's just me because it's my fascination. But again, we're just very simple creatures, and the more that we just show up in our simplicity, our 5 core human emotions, like all 5 that we read on that list, and everybody's seen them before, been there, done that.
Yeah.
We've all felt it, and we know we've all felt it because we can feel it when we see somebody talk about it. You burst into tears. Why? Because you felt fear and pain before.
Yeah.
And therefore recognize it enough to know how to respond with tears. That's what happens, right? Your body already knows how to process that.
We also respond, like, interestingly enough, when like those things are askew, when they're off, when our metrics are wrong, then we look at the wrong thing and we look at people online and we think, oh man, those guys got their shit together. I have nothing. And you realize that it's like we definitely just have become, like, everything has just become askew. Like, I was actually, as you were talking earlier, I was thinking how neat it is that part of what you're doing then as well is you're exposing people to being just better human beings.
Oh, yeah.
From that perspective of just being a better friend, because it's one of those things that you're taking them through, teaching them about their story. But that's one of the things that we learn is going through, any sort of counseling and therapy is you're talking about your story and you're sitting in those awkward moments and you're feeling those feelings and you're going back to things like, I mean, I'll be brutally honest. Like, today was really weird for me. Like, again, because I am
this interview or
no,
like
earlier.
Okay, good.
Earlier.
Just clarifying.
Yeah. Today,
I've
this
been
has been
feeling
really
it too,
awkward.
guys. This has been really awkward.
But but it was just like
Nice
I was
job,
telling.
Anna, nice job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was telling some stories today, putting them together, and it was just an odd day. And then I came up from the office and, was with my wife and stuff and the girls and everything. It just felt odd, and I was like just feeling super like guilted into like crap, like bringing that up, like bringing the weirdness like up and being like. And so when I got here and sat before I came in, I like sent her a text. I'm like, I'm so sorry for like just making things off today. Like just putting things off, because it's one of those things I couldn't really put words to what I was feeling. It's just off. You explained it there, where you're just like, it's just weird. But the odd thing is that we have been told that it's like, I remember My wife and I have talked about it where you'd hear things or something like that where it's like, go away and come back happy or something like that, or do this or this. And so you realize that when you have those feelings, it's okay to sit in those feelings and just sit there. And it's one of the things that, like, as you were talking about, like sitting there and going, okay, well, what am I truly feeling? And not being afraid to actually feel what you're feeling, because there is definitely a vulnerability in it, but then there's also a like, holy smoke, I'm actually feeling this. Like, and what it's doing in my body. Like when I was very attentive to, my last counseling session, it was like realizing like what stress was doing to my body and where I could feel it and why. And then even putting myself in certain situations would make my body hurt and being like, oh my goodness. But it was super vulnerable and like, and odd at times as well, but so incredible. I'm like, holy smoke, our bodies are absolutely amazing. Yeah. And I say all that because I think it's so cool that through what you're doing, through conversations like this and conversations when we leave here, being able to be, if there is only that one person, if you were the one person to somebody in this world, and all you're hearing from this podcast, where it is just like, maybe I will just reach out or just listen for once, instead of make it all about me or whatever that may be. And that can actually help to change someone's life, or just give them a moment where they're like, I can breathe.
Yeah.
Right. And I love that. It's one of those things I always tell my wife, I'm like, it's such a cool thing when you hear people just go, and they can just sit there in it. It's not like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
It's like, you can just sit there in it.
Totally.
It's okay. I think that's one of the reasons why I love just having tea in the morning with my wife, is it's just sit there. You don't have to say anything. We can just be in each other's presence. And I remember, it's so funny. It's like a total random like thought goes that way. But I remember when we were dating and like seeing a couple, and it was like this older couple was sitting having coffee and they didn't say a fucking word the whole time. And I remember I turned to my wife and I was like, we are never going to get to that place where we have nothing to say to each other.
Meanwhile, I aspired to that.
That's like, and I looked down, and it's funny because years ago, I remember my wife and I were like, they were the intimacy of not having to say something. Yeah. And it's saying everything.
Just be together. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, there is nothing it's so sweet and hits you in such a core where you're like, and that's where, going back to you're talking about lyrics and writing lyrics and stuff like that, like I've always struggled, because in just this language, words, that just does not say what my heart has always wanted to say when I write. And so I've always been super insecure that my writing was just way too simple and easy, because it was not in any way. So I felt like my body language, my posture, my everything, it had to make up for what I wasn't being able to get through with those words. And I think sometimes, like, to me, I think that what you're talking about with storytelling almost needs to be a couple's relational thing, where people are able to then realize you can tell your story, because maybe that's a way that your intimacy is going to grow, is when it's like, listen, this is how I'm feeling at this point. I know there's other words and stuff, but that storytelling aspect of it, where you're able to go, man, when we're in this situation, I felt completely like, whew. And like, I didn't know. Yeah. Like I would have never, if I would have like, and just having that opportunity to talk about it and share it in a storytelling form, because I know how many times people have said like, oh, counseling, wow. And it's like, you have no clue until you've realized, like, well, yeah, it just teaches you so much about yourself that you're like, actually, you're the one getting in the way of like actually really furthering this relationship. But I've gone off on a complete tangent. So
no, I think I hear what you're saying though. Sorry, I'm cutting you off, Tyler. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. And we often lead with the thing that happened. Right? We're like, this thing happened. Yeah. And we talk about the external stuff. Like, this person said this to me. We did this. The car drove by. We talk about the facts, right? The story. And we don't just say, I feel sad. Mm-hmm. Like, if I just sat here right now and said, I feel really sad, you're immediately like, tell me more. Yeah. If I said, I drove my car past like a raccoon with a bag on its foot, you'd be like, and? What's your point? Yeah. Right? Like, it's not very compelling. Okay, in this. Well, it's maybe very compelling, actually. Now I'm thinking about it. That's a very
So I was shopping earlier today, and I threw this bag on the road. And I saw these, raccoons go by. Yeah.
Right. And
I was like, screw that raccoon.
Yeah. But we just don't lead with emotion, right? We lead with all the external stuff because it's safer. That's our safe little lockbox. And it's nice when it's like, as you said, you shake hands and you say, this is what I do for a living, and this is what's written on my business card. That's all very, very safe stuff that's been societally approved of already, and we know that's true, and so there's no risk in that at all. There's just really no risk in saying I'm a coach and a podcast person, right? Again, I'm going to keep circling back to the same thing here, but we're talking about bravery. We have to do the thing that accompanies fear. What's the scary thing is to say the thing that most people haven't approved of yet, which is like, I'm scared right now. Like, I'm really scared. And if I came in and actually said, I've never been interviewed by men before, ever. Like, I'm really terrified. That would have set the stage a lot different than,
Totally, yeah.
you know.
Is that true?
It's absolutely true. Did you hear my breathlessness at the top end of this?
Great.
That was so good. Oh, that was
See how I just brought
Can
that
we
back
somehow
together?
Nailed it.
stretch that out and allow like some sort of awkward like
Yeah, like
wind?
change the music. Music come in.
I need a sound effect right now so badly.
Yeah.
Please help me with that. But yeah, I think, I mean, I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing with this podcast and
Thank
really
you.
allowing people to show up as themselves, like who they really are and not who they think they are. And doing that, just like that deeper dive, that mining, as we talked about, it's so powerful. Just ask more questions. I mean, I do it. I'm like a toddler. I'm like, but why? But why? Tell me more.
Annie's great at that. I don't
Right,
ask
why?
enough questions, and then she'll be like, well, did you ask this? I'm like, no, that would have been a good question to ask.
That would have been brilliant.
No, I didn't ask that. No, I'm interested in that as well.
I think it's a great thing that has come out of COVID, though, is the fact that mental health is a lot less of a stigma, in my opinion, because it's been a shared experience virtually worldwide. Is that fair to say that everyone has gone through a form of trauma and change over the last year?
100%. 100%. I would say it would be very strange if you hadn't, if you sort of skirted that in some way.
It didn't affect you at all?
If it didn't affect you at all, yeah.
What? No.
I'm not sure how you could do
Things
that.
are different for you? I've been the exact same.
The whole time, really?
Nothing has
No.
changed.
No, everyone was online all the time. It was great.
What's that about restaurants closing?
Right,
Really?
yeah.
Oh, I didn't notice.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I've been really banging the door down on this topic for many years. Like, my bio from when I first started coaching was like, her passion is destigmatizing mental illnesses and invisible illnesses, right? Why do I do that? Because I have them, and because I've been in the stigma, in my own self-judgment. I didn't want to share it because I was like, oh God, don't say that word.
It's a word, like you say, even this mental health.
Yes.
It's going to make you feel a certain way about it, whether you're comfortable with that word or you're not.
Yeah.
You can't deny it has a weight to it.
But we all have mental health. I think that's the myth, isn't it? It's like, oh, you have a mental health.
It's assumed that
thing.
means it's negative. You know,
Right.
it's got a negative connotation by its
True.
own name.
Right.
And it shouldn't really, because it's the whole spectrum of
Yeah.
health.
There's so much to us that's even programmed in. Like, one thing I remember, like Annie, one time she came back from your place, and that really helped her was the fact that when you get anxiety and you feel like that fear, it's like you've got that natural instinct, like there's a predator chasing you. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, and it's the same feeling. You can't distinguish whether it's like you're just scared because you got a big game the next day, or you're going to do an interview, or you're going to do public speaking. It's the same feeling. Your body doesn't know the difference.
That's right.
As there's like a cougar chasing you, right? So it's actually really interesting. Like, once you can tell yourself that, like, breathe in, I'm not being chased right now, right? And it's something I do for myself that works is, if something's really bothering me and like I can't stop thinking about it, I can be like, okay, what can I do about this right now? Anything? No, then let's think about it tomorrow. Let's get some sleep and tackle this when I can,
That's
do
perfect.
something about it.
Yeah, it's
That's
so
awesome.
present, and yet somebody who struggles with anxiety would be like, no, we're going to have to unravel all of this
No.
right now. Like, what do you mean wait? What is this waiting? Because the waiting is a
I was
very,
gonna
very painful period of time
Yeah.
for people with anxiety. But
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like dumping out a puzzle
fascinating.
worth like 5,000 pieces, and you're just like, no. We're doing the borderlines
Yeah.
first, then we're finding
Now.
all the corners. Now I made a
Yes.
big mess
I guess
of it.
I might get like that as far as like if there's a technical problem like here in the studio and I'm like, no, I gotta fix this now, and like Dave knows this, like I'll just won't shut up about it, and then like sometimes people are like, it's not important right now.
Well, I think that part of it too, that even for myself that I've been learning is it's not just you have anxiety or not, and it's not that you're just afraid or not, and it's not just when you go through the emotions, there's such a wide array, and you're right. There's a lot of emotions that feel like they feel very, very similar. So when people are like, are you nervous? Like, no. It's like, okay, well, and then realize later, I was actually super anxious. And so there is something to be said. Like, I love right now that like my daughters have been learning about like SEL, like social emotional learning, like through school and being able to put like, I think there is so much, not only freedom, but emotionally like intellect, their emotional intellect at the age that they're at already is far surpassed me.
Yeah,
And
our
for
kids
them,
are going to be better than we were.
They're
for sure.
It's interesting when they say new generation, they are just a new human. And we need to be like reaching out to them more. And I love that there are people that are teaching them at a young age, but I mean, from the moment she's got into kindergarten was the opportunity to share how she was feeling every single day.
That's cool.
And anytime throughout the day they could go, and if they couldn't do it, they could at least look up and look at a color. And as an artist, holy smoke, that's something that they have taught me so much about. Is I've shared with you guys before that 1 and 1 was 3 some days, and some days it was red. And as artists, that's how artists think. But that's also too because that's just humans. You know, we all experience things different. We feel feelings differently. Like even the intensity of feelings, we feel them completely differently. Sometimes we dive head deep and I'm like, I'm all in. The next person's like, I don't really understand. And like, it's all okay. And I think the more that we do talk about it, especially as friends, it's the one thing that I love the idea that we only have the capacity for 1 to 3, because it actually makes me feel a little easier than about investing into like 1 to 3 people. Like, you know, I joked with my wife about putting up a close sign on our house when COVID like struck. I was like, I'm okay to close my doors and just close. I'm happy with my family. Like I'm good to go. That's where my batteries are charged. I love being here with them. But I do think that like there is a level of being able to feel safe to share those feelings and also where you're at. That not everything is a 10 out of 10 on the anxiety scale. But the thing is that like I know when I was growing up or, you know, I got to know more about these different feelings, it was you either were 10 out of 10 or a 0. Like, and it's like, no, it's okay to actually, and then when you mix them all together, and I think that the more that we talk about it, the more that it is just normal, right? Like to talk about these things. And that's why I absolutely love that like my daughter at such a young age is much, much farther ahead because she doesn't think twice about sharing how she's feeling yet. In my mind, I still will share it, but there is sometimes a hesitation. And there's a hesitation because it's like, oh yeah, no, break that habit, share how you're feeling. And the whys, it's like, you're right, like asking more questions. And like questions, it's interesting because I will share, growing up in like a religious family, questions got you into trouble. And you didn't question, and questions were a sign of rebellion. And it was only till I was realized this is just bullshit, that all of a sudden the world just opened up and was like, wait a minute, and you can ask. And so, you know, what does that look like in people's lives where it's like, you don't ever do this, and you don't ever do that, and you don't do that. And like, I just like admire and look up to people that are on these self-explorations of just wanting to better humanity, one human at a time.
Yeah, literally. I couldn't have said it better myself, really.
Better humanity, one human at a time.
Better. I love that. Yeah, that's your new tagline.
I like that.
Pineapples.
Nailed it.
Bettering humanity, one pineapple at a time.
That's the new thing. That's awesome. With pineapples. Hope you like it sweet. Oh. That's awesome. I wanted to ask this. I don't know if this is like the best finisher, but it was just crazy the last Unapologetic event, how close to like, it was right in the pandemic, like right as it was starting. Would you miss it by like 5 days, the shutdown?
Literally missed it by 5 days. I still to this day cannot wrap my brain around why the universe allowed me to have that day, because it could have been, and we would still in this moment, so that was March 7th of 2020. So we would still be sitting right now if we had to postpone it, still hanging on to that entire, and that those events take 8 months, give or take, to plan out. That is a multi-tiered, multi-level, multi-speaker, multi-flight, multi-hotel, multi-venue, multi-vendor. It's a massive undertaking. It's huge. It's huge. And nobody really knows like how crazy it is. And your wife, Annie, and I have a beautiful committee, amazing committee that helped behind the scenes. But like no one's making any money either. Like I think that's something that I don't share a lot. This is really actually for a purpose. It's like we want stories out in the world. We want women to gather in rooms together. We want stories to be shared. We want us to come together in that kind of that unity space that we're talking about, that connection, and like have something to just to turn them into from that I'm alone to like I'm not alone, and therefore my story matters, and therefore there is a purpose for me in this world, and I'm going to run out and achieve it. And the people that went to that event, I can think of numerous, some enter the speaker training program. There's been several others that I'm literally witnessing that use that as a springboard to writing a book or to starting a new business, or that event did things for other people. And I just feel so grateful to have like had that moment in time and that opportunity. I still can't believe it. It feels like a dream. It
was amazing just to be there doing the sound for you.
Well, you killed it. And I will add this story, which I probably have shared publicly, but I don't know where. Like on some podcasts, I record my own voice all the time. But Tyler, you personally, like my daughter sang at that event. And I've shared this with you a lot. My daughter was 10 at the time, and she's a great little singer, but she is a little nervous Nelly. Like, she really gets scared in front of crowds. And I've been trying to kind of, encourage her to step out of her space for a while and showcase her voice. And a proud mama, I wanted to share her voice, but she was really scared, and she did great. She was super excited about it. She did a fantastic job. She sang Lady Gaga's Shallow, for goodness sakes. It's like so at the age of 10, and she killed it. And you played the track. You had a track, and then you played guitar. Or something. So
I had the track done pre-made to the click, and then a guitar on top.
Yeah, that's right. So you had the track and then the guitar. And then my 10-year-old on the spot in front of 300 women staring at her as she's like on the stage in that moment, she came in early on the song. So the musical term for that, I don't know. She was supposed to wait
you nailed
one more
it.
bar.
You came in early.
Came in early one bar, yeah.
She just came in early one bar. And so it didn't now match the track.
Yeah.
And I was standing in the back of the room, and I just witnessed you very cool and calm and collected, like just the chillest as Tyler is. Just go and kind of guitar in hand, go back, turn the track off, and continue on the guitar. Nobody noticed it at all. You can't tell looking back at the video. You can't see this. It could bring me to tears thinking about it, that you literally saved my daughter from the feedback that would have destroyed her self-confidence forever.
Well, I know that Tyler knows that we've been there.
I know that feeling.
We know that feeling inside and out when you're not in the right part of the song, you're looking at each other, and you just need to make that fix. And Tyler's told the story actually on the podcast.
Oh, have you? Sorry.
No, this is amazing actually to hear the other side of it, because he was saying, I had to, like, he's like, he empathized. Like, can you imagine if he didn't do anything and he was just like, I'm going to watch her fail? Like, what kind of person would Tyler be to not just be like, and now I fixed this problem?
But and I think that's a huge, for you probably, because you're musical, you were like, I know what to do, just turn the track off and keep moving. To me, I was like, oh my God, the show's going to shut down. Like, I don't know. That felt really catastrophic for me watching it.
For sure. And I was like, I cannot have this go wrong for her, because she did so good.
She did so good.
And it was just an amazing moment. It didn't need the backing track. So it was just...
No, thank God it didn't. Like, and thank God I know nothing about technology. I'm like, where does it plug in? I don't know what you're doing over here. But you just like fix it and smooth this over so my kid could have a moment that quite literally was a pivotal moment in her life, could have shifted what she thought about herself, her self-confidence, what the feedback would have been, and you literally, you like changed my kid's life, or had the potential to like hold this child's life in your hands and say, I could make this mean something, or I could make it mean something else. And to do that, we don't think about that. But if we step into that awareness, Matt, that you and I were talking about, it's like we're just aware of the way that we show up in the world and what we can do for other people. Like, you can literally change people's lives by just showing up in a new way. And something I say all the time, which I'll end on, and maybe this will be a good wrap point, is that the reason I love stories is because everything is a story. Literally everything. Everything we believe, science, math, religion, everything is a story. There's nothing that's not. If you think about it, if you just keep digging, you're like, yes, you're right. Everything. How to build a home. Why we live in this home. What's a podcast? I don't know. We made that up. Humans made that up. We can unmake everything up. We can just go back and say, I don't really like the way that story was written for me. I don't love that I was under a sense of control or a regime that just kind of felt strange for me as a child. I'm going to rewrite that for my kids, as you're doing. Like, this is going to be a new trajectory for my family. So we are so in control of that. It doesn't always seem that way, especially if you're like deep in the throes of anxiety. You don't feel in control at all. But if you can get to that space, really kind of make space for yourself and just know that everything is a story. Everything is made up. Money, businesses, time, relationships, marriages, kids, all of this is just a story. We can just walk over, change the track, and help somebody else. Like, what a gift.
Well, that fills me with pride to know that. I appreciate that. It's an honor to be able to do that.
I'll tell that story like probably 100 million more times, but I will. It's like one of those things where I'll like never not love you now, like forever. Like you can literally do no wrong for me for the rest of my life.
Well, you've made a big difference ever since you stepped into me and Annie's life. So thank you for that. And thank you for coming on the podcast with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you for tuning into the Pineapple Podcast. It's been great. And thank you so much again for being on it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Stay brave.
Matt,
Cue the
we
music.
gotta do it again. Oh man.
And may the force be with you always.
Posh Spice forever.
Yeah, totally.
Cue the music.